integumentary system. We're going to talk about the accessory structures in this part, and we're going to begin. Actually, let's just review real quickly what the accessory structures of the integument actually are. Recall that that's hair, it's the exocrine glands, and then finally the nails, and we'll go in this order as we briefly talk about each one of them. So the first thing is let's talk a little bit about hair and the structure of the hair, the anatomy of hair, and then we'll talk a little bit about how hair grows and things like that. So the first thing is the actual hair itself. So let's make a quick sketch here. Okay, and this is part of this is hair follicle. Some of it's hair, but let me kind of change up our color a little bit here. And okay, that is our stratum corneum. Okay, and then below that will be the rest of the epidermis, which forms some of the hair follicle. Okay, so this is the rest of the epidermis, which remember includes the stratum corneum, of course, but that's the rest of it. Okay, remember that we only find hair in thin skin, so there wouldn't be no stratum lucidum here, but there's everything else. Now, in terms of the hair follicle itself, what I've drawn here. This would be, remember, the epidermis comes down, forms the hair follicle, but the outside there is called the dermal root sheath. And then in here is the epithelial root sheath. Okay. We have, of course, a sebaceous gland. All the hair follicles, to my knowledge, have a sebaceous gland associated with them. And there would be a little bit of a duct here. Remember that most sebaceous, actually all the sebaceous glands, would be wrapped around the hair follicle. Here's a pretty poor attempt at making a sebaceous gland. Let's talk about these glands in a little bit when we talk really about the exocrine glands in a few minutes. But I'll remind you that sebaceous glands, of course, are here, and that these sebaceous glands are oil glands, as we've talked about before. Other things that you see associated with hair follicles. Let's do it over here. One of the smallest smooth muscle fibers that we have is called the erector pili muscle. Now, your book, I'm not sure if it calls it this or not. This is what a lot of them call it. Your book may call it a slightly different name, but it's the erector pili muscle, certainly what you'll see in the lab manual. What this erector pili muscle is, it is a smooth muscle fiber, or smooth muscles, which recall smooth muscle from histology doesn't give us any voluntary control. So you don't have voluntary control over when these contract and when they relax. What it will do is when it contracts, it makes the hair follicle and the hair shaft itself stand up. And I didn't put that in here. This is the actual hair shaft that's coming out of the skin. And down here is let's call it the hair root. And then I'm going to come back in a minute and talk about the matrix. This is called the matrix. But real quickly, back to the erector pili muscle. When it contracts, it makes the hair follicle and the hair shaft stand up. And what that does is, and I guess one way to think about it is, why would we do that? When does it actually happen? Because we know that it happens. Happens to you. And so when does it happen? Well, one thing that can trigger the erector pili muscle contraction is temperature. So if it gets cold, cold temperatures stimulate the erector pili muscle, and it makes the hair follicle stand up. We women notice that, of course, because if you shave your legs, then you know that what we call goosebumps form where the hair either was shaved, or if there's just no hair present in the follicle anymore, you still have that hair follicle standing up. So you see that happening there when you get cold. That is still taking place, even though it really doesn't serve much of a function in humans anymore. Modern humans are just relatively hairless, and so we don't really have much of a there's not much of a advantage to actually making this happen. But it's tied up in our evolutionary history, and we still have that mechanism that still takes place. It just doesn't do anything much anymore for us. So temperature is going to stimulate it. What that would do is that if it's really cold out here on the surface, let's say if it's cold up here, and your skin, of course, is relatively warm, then when you make your erector pili muscles stand up or contract and the hair stands up, it basically creates a nice buffer zone between the atmosphere, the very end of that hair follicle or the end of that hair shaft, and the surface of the skin. So it separates the cold atmosphere from the skin, and that helps to create sort of like a blanket. So that's how it helps us stay warm. Hibernating animals, of course, animals build up their thick coat in the wintertime, and then when they make that contract, it just creates a nice warm blanket for them. Another thing that can stimulate the erector pili muscle is fear. The contraction of it takes place during an emotional response such as fear. Typically, we feel it on the back of our necks when you get kind of spooked a little bit. You feel that your hair follicles on the back of your neck standing up, and you wonder why is that happening. And one of the places where I know most people have seen it is when you look at cats. When cats are about to fight, or one of them is coming to another's territory and they're going to challenge each other. One of the things that animals really don't want to do is to fight, especially if they're about the same size. And so they go through a whole set of different kinds of behaviors to really do what they can to prevent the fight from happening. Because if there's two animals that are going to fight, then roughly speaking, the odds are 50-50 that if you're in that fight, you're going to be hurt. So they go through a whole lot of things to hopefully intimidate the other one so that the fight doesn't actually take place. And in cats, what they do, it's most visible to us, is they puff up that tail and they puff up their hair, and that makes them look much larger to their competitor. Hopefully, if you're that cat that's making yourself look a lot bigger than the other one, then the other one will back down and the fight won't take place. So again, this is another response. Modern humans are just relatively hairless, but we still have that mechanism built in where you get kind of spooked or freaked out a little bit. Hair stands up on the back of your neck, and your body is basically trying to make yourself look bigger so that whatever you're about to confront, thinks twice about it. Of course, it doesn't do anything. We just don't have much hair to make that work anymore. But again, it's still functional. Okay, so the other thing, there's two other things that I want to talk about. Then I'm going to come back to this matrix that I drew down here. The other two things I want to look at, let's see here. Draw a little blood vessel in here. And this is a really pretty bad attempt at a blood vessel and a capillary. But what basically happens in here, this little area is called the hair, actually it's called the, what is that, hair papilla. And that hair papilla is a little capillary bed. Every hair follicle has it, and every hair follicle has a lot of mitosis taking place in it, or cell division taking place in the matrix, and consequently they need a lot of nutrients. So the hair papilla is a capillary that provides nutrients to the hair follicle as the hair is being produced. It also takes waste products away. So that's a little capillary network. The other thing that's not going to be very well shown on this particular drawing, because I'm kind of drawing a cross section or a longitudinal section, and I'm cutting into it. But if you could see it in 3 dimensions, and I'll try to show you one in a second, but if you could see it in 3 dimensions, there are many sensory neurons that attach to this, and all of this that I just drew in yellow is called the hair root nerve plexus. hair root nerve plexus. That's plexus. And every hair follicle has this hair root nerve plexus. It's a sensory neuron system that detects any kind of movement that takes place in that hair follicle. So if you have an insect at the top of the hair, or on top of the skin up there, that happens to be walking around, so you have a little insect up here. Maybe it's a mosquito, right? And it's about to prong you and stick you and try to do some get some blood from you for egg production. Whatever this is, maybe it's an ant. But a lot of those insects have evolved to basically be undetectable. So they land on you. Mosquitoes are kind of classic. They land on you. You don't feel it because they're such lightweight. But as soon as they stick you, of course you feel it because it activates the sensory nervous system. Of course, by the time it sticks you, it has injected its saliva, and if it's carrying any kind of parasites, then that's a problem. So by having hair present on the surface of skin, if this insect that normally you can't detect, when it lands on you, if it walks around and it hits a hair, then that's going to move the hair follicle. And as that hair follicle moves a little bit, it's going to stimulate the hair root nerve plexus, which alerts your brain that says, hey, there's something on the skin right there. You might want to look at it or move it or do something with it. So it's a way that we can feel things moving around on us, crawling on us, perhaps in your ear or someplace behind your back that you can't see very well. It alerts the brain that says, hey, something is on the skin here. Okay. Now the matrix. The matrix itself is an area in the hair root where active cell division called mitosis is taking place. And this is where the actual hair cells are being produced. The new hair is being produced in the matrix. And so we need a lot of blood vessels there or nutrients brought in for this process. It's also the site where melanocytes are found. Okay, melanocytes are found here in the matrix, and they're transmitting or transferring pigments into the surrounding hair cells so that they have pigmentation as well. Now, in terms of hair growth, this is, we know, of course, that hair grows from within and grows out. Hair grows in cycles. Okay, so each hair follicle is really independent of the others. They are asynchronous. So they're not working together in terms of, they don't all start their growth cycle at the same time. They're asynchronous, and roughly they're on this, each hair follicle, depending on the location of the body, has a particular amount of time that it's in a growth stage, and then they go into a resting stage of some particular time. And so basically what happens in a growth stage is it makes obvious sense. If your hair is growing, then the cells in the matrix are doing active cell division, and as it grows, those older cells get pushed out to the surface and the hair gets longer. Okay? Now, when it goes into a resting stage, what happens is that mitosis stops in the matrix. So no more hair is produced in the hair follicle. And the hair follicle just hangs on to the existing hair, which is already present. It doesn't get rid of it yet, it just hangs on to it. The next time the growth stage comes up, then the existing hair that's been held onto by that hair follicle for some extended period of time will be lost. So the hair follicle will remove it, kick it out, and then the new hair will come in behind it. So they go through a growth stage and then they go through a resting stage. And in terms of how long these stages last, it really depends on the hair follicle in terms of its location. So for example, eyelashes. If you look at hair follicles in the eyelashes, they have a growth stage of around 30 days. Again, they're all independent of each other. They're not synchronized, but each hair follicle grows for about 30 days in the eyelashes, and then it enters the resting stage, which lasts about 105 days. If you contrast that with the hair on the scalp, the growth stage is about 3 years, and then the resting stage is somewhere between 1 to 2 years. So each hair follicle grows for about 3 years, and then it goes into a resting stage where it just holds onto the existing hair for 1 to 2 years. Now, 90% of the hair on the scalp, 90% of the hair follicles on the scalp are in a growing stage at any given time. And For the most part, an average person loses about 100 hairs a day. So what that indicates is about 100 hair follicles, 100 hair follicles or so, are going out of the resting stage and into the next growth stage. And that's why you lose those 100 hairs a day. Okay, I'm just seeing where we are here. So we talked about hair color. Basically, that's the melanocytes that are present in the matrix. I guess the next thing to do, is to talk about the next accessory structure. So let's look at the next structures here. And we'll get there next. Okay, the exocrine glands. Let's talk a little bit about exocrine glands. There are 4 types that I want to talk about, exocrine glands, and those are going to be the sebaceous glands. Then we'll talk about the sweat glands briefly. We'll talk about ceruminous glands, those glands that are found in your ear, and then mammary glands. Okay, let's talk about each one of these one at a time. And just to remind you of some of these, where these are located, what they look like, we'll talk about the sebaceous glands first, and here is the sebaceous gland. Your book calls also known as an oil gland. By the way, since we're here, this is kind of the view that I just drew over here just a second ago. So this hair follicle sliced open. This is what it looks like when it's not cut open. Okay, so you'll notice that here's the right there is the papilla. The matrix is right in there. You've got the dermal root sheath there and the epithelial root sheath there. You've got a sebaceous gland there. Okay, so that's kind of what we just drew. We attempted to draw. By the way, here's the erector pili muscle. Okay. Hair root nerve plexus. See the hair root nerve plexus right there? See how it wraps around the existing hair follicles? Okay, so if that hair follicle moves in any direction, that hair root nerve plexus is going to be stimulated. Okay, back to the sebaceous gland though. Sebaceous glands, also known as oil glands, these are found in the dermis, the surrounding hair follicles, and these produce a type of secretion that is released from the gland by a holocrine type. Holocrine. Remember holocrine secretions? That's when the entire cell becomes part of the secretion. Okay, sebaceous glands, the entire cell becomes part of the secretion. Makes large amounts of lipids, and the secretion that comes out of a sebaceous gland is called sebum. We may have mentioned that in the organ system survey from the chapter 1, but sebum is a secretion that lubricates the skin, it lubricates the hair, and it's also thought to have lots of antimicrobial or antifungal compounds in it. So it really makes it difficult for microbes to live on the surface of your skin if you have a lot of sebaceous glands, or rather if you have a lot of sebum present. Now, sebaceous glands are not evenly distributed around the body. You have lots of them located on the face, the back, the chest, and the male sex organs. Lots of sebaceous glands concentrated in those areas. These glands are also very sensitive to changes in sex hormone levels. Okay, so during puberty, these particular glands really respond, and when they get clogged up, you get pimples, and in some cases it can lead to severe acne. So those are sebaceous glands, holocrine types of secretions, and the secretion is called sebum. All right, the next one that we want to take a look at is the sweat gland, and the one that this particular image shows is an eccrine sweat gland, but recall we also have apocrine sweat glands, not shown on this particular illustration. Apocrine sweat glands are not shown here because there should be an eye there. Apocrine are not shown on this slide because this is not a slide of armpit or genitalia region. This would be just an area of normal skin, okay, thin skin. So remember, apocrine sweat glands are found only in those regions. And apocrine sweat, let's talk about that one specifically first. The reason I should say this first. Remember when we looked at the various types of glands and we classified them based on their function. So you had apocrine, eccrine, and holocrine. So we just said that the sebaceous glands were holocrine glands. Well, it turns out that apocrine sweat glands, we used to think that they secreted their products by an apocrine type of secretion, which, remember, half the cell breaks off and becomes part of the secretion. We now know that that's not true. They actually release their products by eccrine methods. So it's just the secretion itself, it's just the exocytosis event that takes place. However, because we named them apocrine sweat glands before, we don't change the name. So apocrine sweat glands actually release their product by an eccrine type of secretion. Okay? Now, the apocrine sweat itself is not due to anything that you necessarily produce. We know that apocrine sweat has, you associate that with body odor, but it's actually the microbes that live under the armpits and in warm areas, and those microbes feed on that sweat. That sweat has lots of nutrients in it, and it actually fosters the development of a microbial community. And it's the metabolism of those microbes that produce waste products that actually have the smell. So you don't actually make sweat that smells that way. It's the microbes that produce their waste products as they metabolize that sweat. So apocrine sweat glands actually release their products by an eccrine. I'm not sure why I'm forgetting the R's here. By an eccrine method. Okay. Now the other type of sweat gland that we see here is in fact an eccrine sweat gland, and of course they release their products by an eccrine type of secretion. But this eccrine secretion, this eccrine sweat gland, they're all over the body. They're widely distributed, far more abundant than the apocrine glands, apocrine sweat glands. Adults have anywhere between 3 to 4 million of these things. You have lots of them on the palms, lots of them on the soles of the feet. And this type of secretion, when you put it directly onto the surface of the skin, right here through this pore, or through this, through that duct and onto the pore, then it comes out and it's called perspiration. And this is about 99% water. It evaporates as that sweat evaporates into the atmosphere. Remember from chemistry, as it evaporates, it pulls the heat away with it, and that enables the skin itself to cool down. Now, when these particular eccrine or merocrine sweat glands are fully working, when they're fully activated, you could lose up to 1 gallon of sweat per hour. Okay, that's an incredible amount of solution, incredible amount of fluid if you're actually losing that much water per hour. And that can result in some really dangerous conditions like electrolyte imbalances. So it's really important, of course, everyone knows it's important when you're sweating that much to replenish your body fluids. All right, eccrine and apocrine sweat glands. Now, the next one here, next type of eccrine or exocrine gland is a ceruminous gland. Ceruminous glands are modified apocrine sweat glands. Okay, that's basically what they are, but they're found in the ear canal, and they produce a type of secretion called cerumen, which is earwax, right? It's a very thick, very sticky secretion, and it has a whole host of functions, one of which is it helps to protect the eardrum from too much sound, but probably more importantly is the ear canal itself is one of those areas where you can't see into it. So you have lots of hair present, typically called vibrissae, and that vibrissae is there to basically warn you that something may be crawling in your ear, if in fact it is. But the cerumen is there to also trap it. So you know those little sticky traps that big supermarkets put out to trap those mice, and those mice get stuck in that sticky stuff, and then they sit there and die in a horrible way. Well, that's exactly what the cerumen does. As insects crawl into your ear, that cerumen acts to trap it and prevent it from getting in too deep, because if it gets in too deep, then you have the insect eventually dying and causing an ear infection, all kinds of problems. So cerumen really prevents it from getting in too far before it causes other kinds of problems. All right, last one here, type of exocrine gland is the mammary glands. These are also modified apocrine sweat glands, and they're found in the breast. These produce milk through an apocrine type of secretion, and these are only going to develop in females during pregnancy and during lactation. So males don't produce mammary glands. All right, now our last accessory structure to talk about is, let's see here, the nails. Let's talk about the nails real briefly. Don't want to spend too much time here on the nails, but just to briefly kind of talk a little bit about what they are and a little bit maybe on their anatomy. So first of all, fingernails themselves are nothing more than flattened claws. Primates are the only animals to have flattened claws, which we call fingernails, and toenails for that matter. But the cells that we find in fingernails are made of they contain hard keratin, which is what makes the nail itself very hard. Remember, soft keratin we find in moist stratified squamous, and in fact keratinized stratified squamous. Actually, I said that wrong. Soft keratin is only found in the epidermis, and in the epidermis. It's also found in hair. Some of it's found in hair. Hard keratin is found in hair, but it's also found in the fingernails. And hard keratin, of course, is what makes the fingernails hard. Now, the anatomy of the nail itself. Let's see. So the nail body is there. And in terms of where the fingernail actually grows, so here is kind of a longitudinal section. Here's a superior view. But where the actual hair or the fingernail cells grow is right here in the matrix. So that's the matrix. That's the site of new fingernail cell production. And then that leads into the root, which is very young nail cells. And then eventually that gets pushed out. So it goes this direction, it gets pushed out this way. And right there's the nail body. A little bit of stratum corneum right here, making up the eponychium, sometimes called the cuticle. You can see it right there. That's just stratified corneum. Stratified corneum? No, stratum corneum. That's stratum corneum. And then the hyponychium down here is also stratum corneum, just underneath the nail body. The lanula, real quickly on the lanula, this is an area where there's white, a little bit of white right there, right up against the eponychium. And it tends to be white because there's very little blood supply underneath the nail body right there. So typically is white. The rest of this is pink because of the underlying blood vessels.